Hi ladies, welcome back to Bernina Club. Yay, the first for 2015, and I've got lots and lots of things to show you today. So first of all, for those ladies that are new, every month I show you different ideas, tips and tricks to use on your Bernina sewing machine. And today we're going to start off with some stitch recipes. Now stitch recipes are simply using the gorgeous stitches that you have on your sewing machine and joining them together to make some really cool designs. So this is the Aurora 430 and it has got 150 designs, so I've got plenty of designs to choose from. Even if your machine's only got 12 designs, you can still use stitch recipes. So you will see that I have got on the website, I have put on the wonderful Bernina America stitch recipes if you have trouble thinking of what stitches you'd like to put together. So there are pages and pages of wonderful ideas if you don't have any imagination to do them yourself. But once you start, you will want to make your own stitch recipes. Now why would you want to do them and where would you put them? Well, I like to do them when I'm doing bag handles. So I will just get a strip of fabric and I will put stabilizer behind it and I'll stitch my little stitch recipes. Then what I will do is sew them on to a grosgrain ribbon or a heavier bit of fabric to make a cool bag handle. So I'm going to show you how I go about doing my stitch recipes. So the first thing is you will have lots and lots of designs that are already one way, so they are only going one way. So an example of that will be, say, number 29, and it's a little tulip, so it only faces one way. Now on all your machines, whether it be one of the new modern ones or one of the older ones, you can control where your stitches are sewn. So you have some cool little gadgets in your machine. And if you have lost it or you have misplaced it somewhere amongst your sewing room, you can buy these little sewing gauges. And what this does, it's like a quilting guide and you can adjust it for how wide you want to sew from the edge of your fabric. And you'll notice that on your feet, a lot of your feet have a screw in the back. And this screw gets undone and you can line up your little sewing gauge or your quilting guide, whatever you call it, and you can adjust that to sew. Now this foot is foot 20, so your machine will either come with an open toe foot 20, see the whole front of the foot is cut out, or you will have foot number 6, and number 6 is your embroidery foot. So if you have an older machine, this foot will be called an 030 foot. And it's exactly the same as the number 20, but it has a little hole in the middle so I can do gathering and shearing elastic with it. So we're going to use the number 20 today, but if you haven't got it, the number 6 is perfectly fine. Okay? The next thing you're going to do is, in your bobbin case area, that I just pulled the whole lot out, I will show you your bobbin case will look possibly something like this. Now this is the original bobbin case Bernina have, and they haven't changed them for 75 years, but some of you will have a slightly different bobbin case. If you have one like this, because you're going to be doing lots of different fancy stitches, you're going to thread your thread through this little eye on your bobbin case. Now normally you do that for doing your buttonholes, but today we're going to do it for doing our fancy stitches. Now what that does is it tightens your bobbin tension. Okay? Now if you have a different machine and also an embroidery machine, you will have two bobbin cases. One will look like this without a tag on it there, and one will have a little curly tail for machine embroidery. You're going to use that bobbin case for what we're doing today. So you're tightening the bobbin tension. If you want to have one of the new 8 series machines, you're going to put your bobbin in as if you're doing machine embroidery with a tighter tension. Okay, so I'm going to just actually take that off, and I'm going to show you how to do your stitching. So I'm just going to put my bobbin case back together because I always oil and clean my machine, but I didn't click it in hard enough, so I'm just going to pop my bobbin case system back together, put my sew table on. I've threaded the eye of my bobbin case, and I'm going to use a completely different colour thread on top. Now this is standard metricine in my bobbin, but I'm going to choose a silky thread for on the top. With this for 430 and 440, you must make sure you double click your bobbin case system in, which I do forget at times, or else it falls out. Now I'm going to choose a silky thread, so I'm going to choose a nice bright embroidery thread. So I'm going to take off my standard sewing thread, and for those ladies that don't know, you should cut your thread here, and you should pull this out from the needle end. Now the reason why we do that is so that by instead of pulling our thread back through here, we don't get a build-up of lint inside our machines and then wonder why our tension's not working, because in here is our tension unit and we don't want to clog that up with thread. Now this little bit of thread you've now pulled out, I would like you to keep in a plastic bag because we're going to be using those later on to sew our own fabric. So please keep all your little threads. I've got mine in my little basket and I'm going to keep them in a plastic bag. So I'm going to take this thread off. And always make sure when you take your thread off that you tidy your threads by putting them in there, and your sewing room won't get all messy. Do I do that? Not all the time, but I should. Now, this is quite a large reel of thread, and by putting it there, it doesn't quite fit. So I'm going to put up my extra thread stand and I'm going to pop it on here, okay? And I'm going to sit my thread on here. Now this thread that I'm using is called Poly Neon. It's by a company called Madeira, and this is the same thread but the old reels. So if you have these, they're exactly the same thread and they're very, very good, and they're 1,000 meters for only $9.20. So it's very good value. You can buy smaller reels of thread. So this one is by Medlar and it is 200 meters and it's $7.10, and it's called Polysheen. A beautiful thread, but you can see this is better value. So we have every color under the sun out of this thread. I use both of them. Now, so if I'm having my thread standing up, I'll just bring it along and thread it up as normal, and I've just got a standard sewing needle in. Make sure your needle's at the highest position, and you're going to use your automatic needle threader. Now, when you are going to use it, you do need to make sure your needle's at the highest position, and you also need to make sure you hook it under there, keep your tension on your machine, push down your needle threader, slide it in, wait for it to click, and let your right hand go. I'm having a lot of people not letting their right hand go and then pulling the thread back out. Then when you let it go, it's done this lovely big loop under here, and then you simply pull that and you have threaded your needle. So make sure you know how to use that correctly, and you will not have a problem. I'm going to pop on my number 20 foot, make sure I push my little bar down to secure it, put my thread underneath my foot, and cut my thread underneath and close my door. I do not need to bring my thread up. Alright, now when you're doing thread recipes, you're wanting to start at the beginning of your work, at the beginning of a stitch, and end at the end of a stitch. So what you want to do to start off with is on your fabric, I'm going to do it through wadding because I want to show you what you do if you have any tension problems with going through wadding. So I'm going to sew on this wadding. Now, how do I get my wadding to stay in one place without moving when I'm sewing? I love this stuff. This is a non-toxic spray adhesive and it's only temporary. So I just, without getting it on my board, I just spray very, very gently on my fabric and on your wadding, and you only do it like that. Don't do any more. It will last a very long time, and you just lay your fabric over top like that, lining it all up, and you just simply press it on and leave it for a couple of minutes to set, and that now is all completely done. If you want to put your backing fabric on now and quilt through it, you can do exactly the same to your backing. But I need to prove to you ladies how easy it is just to sew through here without having to have any tension problems on the back. So there's my piece of fabric ready to go. All right, then I'm going to come over to the machine and I'm going to leave it on my setting here, and I'm going to choose a fancy stitch. And to start off with, I want a fancy stitch that's only going to go one way. So I'm going to choose a stitch that you'd have on even a 40-year-old machine, and it's number 87. Now this stitch, I think you'll be able to see, if I put my finger there, it's a stitch that is on seriously all of the older machines, and it's a stitch I really, really, really like. So that's the stitch I'm doing today. So you should always have a test sample first, but, oh, I've forgotten one step. Before you start sewing, you want to get your ruler and lay it on your fabric, and you want to do a chalk mark where you're going to start sewing, so you start in the same place. We'll come over here a bit, and I'm using the Charcoal Liners by Clover, and there's my chalk mark, and it can be brushed off. Lovely and clear. Okay, so that's where I'm going to put my needle down to start my stitch. So I'm going to lift my knee control over, I'm going to bring my needle down to start exactly on that line, and I'm not going to do anything at the moment. I'm just going to trial it out. Now, because I'm working on wadding, you would think, why have I not got my walking foot on? Well, you don't always have to use your walking foot, and I might want to do a forward and reverse feeding stitch. You cannot do that with your walking foot. So because I'm doing a very, very tight stitch, it's on 0.8, I'm just going to push my stitch length and go to 1.00. So my stitch length, I've lengthened it out a tiny little bit to allow for the wadding underneath. Okay, so now I'm just going to sew a row of my fancy stitches, and remember, I should have tested it before I started, and I know after doing a lot of sewing that when I'm working with the wadding, I need to change my tension to 3. Very rarely do you need to change it, but when you're doing fancy stitches and you're working with wadding, it pays to take it up to 3. You watch where your sewing guide is going, not where your machine is sewing. Alright, so I can see after my first stitch my black thread, and then I took it up to 3, and now my black thread is gone. Hence why I'm doing white fabric, black thread on the back, and a fine thread on the top, so you can really see that your tension's perfect. So you do your first row. So this is if you want to sew right through wadding. If you're going to do a bag handle, you would simply have your fabric, and you would interface your fabric and maybe have a bit of tear away. So depending on your fabric you're using and what you're using it for, there are different methods. So my first row is going to be just with that, and making sure your thread's feeding nicely, you won't have any tension problems. Okay, should we go faster? The machine can go as fast as you want it to go. I had it on half speed, and with my foot flat down, that's as fast as it went. Okay, then I go like this, and now I can go faster. But I choose to go about 3/4 so that it doesn't bounce around. There we go, and that's plenty fast enough to do your first row. Now when you're going to finish, what you can do is push pattern end. So pattern end will come up, and it will have a little D or a sail picture with a line at the top and a line at the bottom, and that means it's going to stop at the end of your pattern, so you can make sure it's perfect. You can take your work out and cut it. Okay, now for my second row, which I am going to do exactly that width apart, I'm going to use my mirror image button. And if you're not sure what your mirror image button looks like, it will be 2 little flags side by side with a line down the middle, or 2 half circles side by side with a line down the middle. And if you're really not sure, then just go back and refer to your book. So now I'm making sure my needle starts in the same place, even though I have adjusted a little bit, it'll be fine. And I'm going to sew down the other side. If you don't have a mirror image, of course you can just turn your work down and start the other way. The only problem with that is your fabric might work against each other and move, in which case you need your walking foot. Okay, so I'm just going to go down the other side. And I'm going to use a couple of colours today so you can really see what I'm doing. And I'm watching my sewing guide. I'm not watching my stitching and I'm not watching my foot because I want to keep my work nice and straight. So I'm watching where my sewing guide is working. You know you're going to love using these bits in your sewing box because you always wonder what they're for. Make sure you put on your sew table as well because your sew table keeps your work nice and flat. Saves your work from buckling over, and I'll show you that in a minute. Really important. Some people say they never use it, but you can't keep your work nice and flat if you don't use it. So stitch down and remember your pattern end button. You can push it when you get to that last pattern. So watching this, remember, not watching what the foot's doing. You can pretty much count down the last ones and then pattern end. Okay, take your work out and cut it. And you've got 2 fabulous rows of stitching. Okay, now I'm going to change to another colour thread to use a different stitch. So remember, cut your thread and pull your work through, pull your thread through and keep your little tails. Keep all your tails. And I'm going to use this orange thread so we get a really good idea of what I'm doing. Remember, take your thread off and lock it in your thread holder. Now this time I'm going to put this thread this way because it is designed to lie down with this on. So make sure you've got no loose pieces of your thread, and by taking that off, that fits right inside my felt. And I'm going to pop this on, and not too tight. So remember, foot up, your tension's open, always thread with your foot up. Here, down, around, up and down. And use your needle threader, put it in, let it go, then do that, because then you won't have a problem. And you'll learn to love your needle threader. Now I'm going to do a stitch on the inside of both of these. So I'm going to choose to do something that 90% of you will have, so I don't have you emailing me saying, oh, you're doing something I can't do. So most of you will have the blanket stitch, and the blanket stitch is number 50, but there's also a triple blanket stitch. So number 50 and 51, one is a straight stitch, forward feeding blanket stitch, and one is a forward and reverse feeding blanket stitch. Now I think I'm going to do that one so you can see what it's like. You can't do this with a walking foot, remember, because you can't go forward and reverse. So I'm going to do stitch number 51, the triple one, and take my mirror image button off. Now what I'm going to do, instead of leaving it the size that is preset, I'm going to take the width out wider and the length longer. So I'm going to go up to 3.3 and 3.8, just so I can show you that you can. All right, and now I'm going to start sewing, and this time the inside, I'll move that, the inside of my foot is running along my stitch that I've already done. Okay, and I'm going to feed it nice and evenly, and this time I'm watching my needle and my foot, and I'm running my needle down alongside the stitch I've already done. You're going to love having play with your stitches. If you do the same colour, white on white, cream on cream, all orange, all blue, you'll start to get it looking like lace work. Alright, so it's really, really nice to do this. So you can start going quite speedy once you get your iron. And I like the the triple blanket stitch because it's quite effective. See, it goes 3 times backwards and forwards and 3 times sideways. So if you start seeing triple, start slowing down. You really, really do need to make sure you get your eye in. Normally wouldn't put these two colours together, but I'm actually really liking them so you can see. Quite effective. So when you get down to the end, make sure you push your pattern end. And I haven't asked it to lock off at the end of my pattern, so you'd want to pull those threads to the back and tie them off. But a lot of the new machines have a lock off function, and this one has it. I'll use it this time just to show you. And that will also do pattern end. Alright, so when I come down to the end, I'm going to push the lock off button and it will lock off for me. It's not a bad idea to actually do a little booklet with all your stitches anyway, so you learn which ones you love and which ones you don't love so much. And lock off. Okay, and it locked off perfectly. Now I'm going to push my mirror image button and I'm going to go down this side. So I'm going to line up my needle and line up my foot so that my stitch is going to be right down the inside there, and away you go. So I'm not actually using my little guide at the moment, but I'm going to use it in a minute. So you can see, don't always think to use the single blanket stitch. The triple blanket stitch is awesome. And make it wider and make it longer. Don't be scared. It's nice to change it. And if your machine doesn't sound as quiet as mine, just give it an oil. Okay? So oiling your machine before you start a project is a very good idea. And when you're using wadding, it does soak up the oil quite a bit. So you make sure that you oil it frequently, especially when you're quilting. And I've not ever had oil come up on my machine when I've oiled it. But if you're worried, run it through some fabric first. Okay, so oil your machine and clean it. Put a new needle in, because remember, 8 hours is the life of a sewing needle. So sew down to the end. Start getting speedy once you get your confidence up. And these machines handle the speed very, very well. And I'll show you a couple of little tricks if you don't do it so perfect. Because you can always fix things. There's never ever a time where you can't fix something. Now I'm going to change my little quilting guide so I can sew a stitch through the middle. Remember, lock off button. Locked off, I don't have to worry. So it's starting to look quite effective with my stitches. Okay, now I'm going to use another thread, or another colour should I say. Pull my thread through, and what I'm going to do is I'll put on, actually I'll put that back on because that's going to look quite effective down the centre, because it's rather nice, that colour, and I don't think we need 3 colours. So pop that back on. If you're worried about this moving, just pop a bit of plastic over there so that it doesn't move around too much, just to hold it a bit firmer. So threading, remember, needle, do the same thing. Now I'm going to choose a design this time that goes both ways. So I'm not going to choose a design that doesn't feed well. That only goes one way. So number 40, and I can take my mirror image button off. Number 40, yeah, that's pretty. Okay, what I want to do is I want to put it exactly through the center here. So I'm going to line up my foot through the center, and I'm going to move my sewing guide so that I can watch where my guide goes there. And if you're really good, you'd measure from the needle out and the needle out if you're really, really good. Will I? No, but you will, because you'll be more disciplined than I am. So I'm going to start, and if you really want to, you can lock off your design before you start sewing, so that is locked off as well. And it just is either a little knot, or you'll have a different picture of a lock off button. All right, and now I'm going to watch where this stitch is. Oh, that was a good trick. This design goes forwards then backwards, so I should have tested it and I would have known where to put my needle to start. So there's a good thing that happened, so I can show you. So now I'm just going all the way down the centre again, watching this guide and putting it through the centre of my work. So, you know, have fun with your stitches. They are awesome, and you can make your own stitch recipes. I like to make up my own because then I know it's unique. One thing you can't do on these particular machines is make the flower patterns bigger or more squat because you lose the design. On some of the bigger machines with the 9mm opening, you have a little bit more scope. So just be happy with what you can do with your little machines, with your 5mm, because they're just as beautiful. And you can have more rows of stitching if you like. And so have fun and do some stitch recipes. And you'll find you want to add them onto all sorts of things. Bags, bag handles, clothing. This would look beautiful around the border of a skirt or dress. Really, really nice. And I will tell you something else which I found interesting. When you're sewing a lot, and especially fancy stitches, your little arm here can loosen where you're holding your foot down. So make sure that's tight, and if it loosens too often, make sure you bring it in and get the mechanic to tighten it. Because I have found on some of our class machines that get used a lot and your feet are taken off, it does loosen up. And there's nothing worse than when you're sewing and your foot falls off. It's not good. So pattern end. Perfect. Oh, that's actually very, very pretty. All right. Now I need to show you how amazing it is on the back because the Bernina tension's beautiful. Look at that. So I've got no colour of that black coming through on the right, and it's pulling it all in on the back perfectly. Okay? And you can see from the flower, if I had the same, you know, like that flower on the back is black, is so perfect, then I could have a total contrast on the back of my fabric and it would be perfect anyway. Pretty, hey? So that is my stitch recipe. Now, I need to show you some that I've done to show you what can happen. Right, oh, I've done a similar one. This was done 3 days ago. So here's a similar one here. And can you see my thread all broke on here? What happened was, I had loosened my reel and it had got caught in behind here like this. And it broke the thread. So please make sure that when you start, you wind it up nicely and make sure it's firm to start off with and you won't have any problem. And I'll just show you one more recipe. This one here, when I sewed this, I put my first design, which is my black, my second design, that's my pink, and it really wasn't very effective. So I went through the middle with a little satin stitch. So the sky's the limit. You can put two together and not like them. So you can just change them by putting a third colour through the middle and just making it a very, very one width satin stitch. And you can see you can go around really, really tight curves. But when you do this, you need to do it with single pattern. So one stitch at a time. Turn your work, one stitch at a time, and turn your work. So have loads and loads of fun with your stitch recipe. And now you can go and grab a cup of tea. And when we come back, I'm going to show you heaps more fun things. So I'll see you soon.